Sometimes you hear a story that's so strange, so biologically impossible, it just makes you stop and think. Well, we're about to dive into a myth that starts with a single, really bizarre idea about this incredible animal.
So here it is. This is the wild idea at the heart of our story. The notion that if you take one of the biggest animals on the planet and divide it, you don't end its life, you magically create two more. It's just an absurd, almost funny idea. But believe it or not, it was once whispered around as truth.
So you have to ask, where does a myth like this even come from? It's definitely not from a biology textbook, that's for sure. Let's dig into the origins of this very peculiar piece of folklore.
I want you to picture the huge African plains, maybe around a campfire at night. This wasn't some scientific theory being debated in a university. Nope. This was a story told in whispers, a folk tale passed down from one generation to the next, and it just kind of took on a life of its own because nobody ever really stopped to question it.
But stories, especially the really strange ones, can't just go on forever without someone eventually asking, wait a minute. And that's exactly where our hero comes into the picture. One very curious elephant who wasn't happy just hearing the tale.
Let's meet Bombo. What made Bombo special wasn't his size or his strength, but his mind. See, while all the other elephants just heard the story and repeated it, Bombo had this deep curiosity, this need to figure out how the world actually works.
You can almost hear the gears turning in his head, can't you? Could this really be true? That's it. That's the simple question that starts to pull apart myth from fact. It's the little spark that kicks off every big discovery. To Bombo, it just didn't add up.
And this wasn't just a passing thought for him. He was genuinely puzzled by it. And that puzzle needed to be solved. So Bombo turned his quiet curiosity into a real active mission to find the truth.
So where do you go when a local story just crashes head-on with logic? Well, you find an expert, and Bombo's journey for the truth was about to hit its most important moment.
Bombo was smart. He knew that to get a real answer, he couldn't just ask another storyteller. He had to find the keepers of knowledge, the scientists of the jungle, if you will, the ones who cared about evidence and reason more than a good story.
So he stands before them and just asks the question, point blank. The very thing that had been bugging him for so long, he's putting the myth to the ultimate test, looking for a straight, no-nonsense answer.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole conflict, doesn't it? On one side, you've got this magical idea from the myth, a wonderful, impossible creation of more life. And on the other, you've got the cold, hard laws of nature. It's a total collision of fantasy and reality.
And there it is, the answer. It was simple, it was kind, but it was absolute. The experts laughed a little, not to make fun of Bombo, but just at how silly the myth was. The truth was simple. Division doesn't create life, it ends it. Myth busted.
But hey, the story doesn't just end with a fact check. The real lesson is what Bombo does next. This is where a simple story turns into something much deeper.
Because when you learn something important, you don't just keep it to yourself, right? You share it. Now that he had the truth, Bombo knew he had a new job to do for his community. He went back not just as Bombo, but as a teacher.
And this was his big realization. He took a simple biological fact and turned it into this powerful philosophy for his herd. Our strength, our value, our very survival, it all depends on our integrity, on being whole. And this lesson wasn't just for elephants. It's for all of us, really. It's a timeless reminder to appreciate ourselves for everything that we are, to get that our true strength comes from unity and, maybe most importantly, to be skeptical of any story that says we become better by being broken apart.
And so, the story ends with a community that's been transformed. The elephants, with Bombo's discovery as their guide, found a new kind of pride, not in some fantasy about multiplication, but in the real strength that comes from being unified and whole.
And that leaves us with one last question to think about. Bombo's myth was about an elephant, so it's pretty easy for us to spot the problem. But what about the myths we live by? What false ideas about division do we just accept without a second thought, in our communities, in our relationships, or even just within ourselves? Now that's a question worth asking.